Greetings, magnificent souls, to the Attract Health, Build Wealth podcast, where we have open and honest discussions about ourselves. This is a place where we break down, break away, and break through codependency, allowing ourselves to attract health, build wealth, and live a peaceful life. We are tired of being sick and tired. We are tired, but we are not giving up. We know that there is something magnificent inside of us. And because we are fighting daily, hourly, and by the minute, fighting ourselves, our kids, our spouses, we have to do things differently. We have to break the cycle. We don't have a million chances. We have to be happy now. We have to find a way. So how do we do that? How is that possible? If you look around at what society is telling you, they tell you that what we're doing is impossible. Yet it's happening every single day. It's happening through the practice and love that we call awakening the magnificent soul. We are all magnificent souls, and these are our stories of healing. Today in episode 12, I wanted to talk about something I came across on one of the myriad of podcasts that I listen to. And I can't for the life of me find the episode, but thank you to whomever introduced it to me. And that is the practice called positive psychology. And today I wanted to talk about what it is, why it piqued my interest, and why I think it's important. But before we get into this discussion, don't forget to let me know your thoughts about the episode, any feedback you have, or anything you'd like me to cover on future podcasts at epiphanyvault.com. Remember, you can share anonymously. It is a safe place, and I, of course, would welcome the discussion. And on to the topic, positive psychology. And this is so interesting to me as I've run the gamut of emotions and dysfunction in my life. And I have had professional help in the form of therapy, and I've tackled things and issues independently. And when I was deep in my codependency, I was so lost and disconnected from myself. I was in turn in deep depression. To paraphrase, positive psychology is a scientific paradigm of positivity in one's life. And according to my online research, it encompasses all of life's components: personal, biological, relational, cultural, etc. And it's a relatively new offshoot in psychology, and its scientific backbone is rooted in the importance and practice of leading a fulfilled, and for this show's purpose, a healthy life. And in some respects, it is the anti-thema to long-standing practices in the field of mental diagnoses, psychoanalysis, like depression, for example. And from what I can gather, it's not an effort to diminish those longstanding psycho practices, but an addendum to traditional therapeutic treatments. And in positive psychology, attention is given to happiness and positivity and practices to develop, enhance, and sustain these life-fulfilling practices. Here's a great summation that I found from the movement's founders, Drs. Seligman and Peterson, and I'll link this in the show notes as well, is positive psychology is concerned with three issues: positive emotions, positive individual traits, and positive institutions. Positive emotions are concerned with being content with one's past, being happy in the present, and having hope for the future. Positive individual traits focus on one's strengths and virtues. And I just want to point out here that there are naysayers to this practice, but I find that the promises and development of positive psychology exciting as it lends a clinical focus to a positive human development. And as we do here, and as I have done and continue to do, I have practiced positive psychology without even really knowing it. It helped me immensely as I found my own formula out of depression and into daily and interpersonal health and wealth. And I think that's why I was so attracted to it. But it is not a practice to diminish or completely absorb other psychotherapeutic or analytical practices. So I think that's worth noting. But in my opinion, a concentrated effort to weave in aspects of positive psychology into healing can only be beneficial. And we know how important cultivating positive self-love is to healing because we do that here. And some of the tools that positive psychology uses in cultivating are things like writing gratitude letters and learning optimistic thinking. And this is where I kind of have a rolling stop with regard to positive psychology in my experience. And here's my asterisk. And this comes directly from my experience. All those tools like writing gratitude letters, learning optimistic thinking, are amazing tools for deploying a positive mental state. I have to recognize that there has to be an internal connection to these activities. And as I've talked about before and gleaning from my own experience, I became at one point extremely frustrated in my journey because I was doing those things. I was checking things off the list, checking activities off that were quote unquote prescribed to me, so to speak, whether that be from a professional in therapy, whether that be in different self-help books that I would come across, like 50 things to be grateful for every day. Check. Saying affirmations in front of the mirror. Check. Saying thank you. Check. And you see where I'm going. I was doing all these things, but my mental state still didn't improve. And that, of course, was very frustrating. And it wasn't what I realized later, and it wasn't until I believed all of those things that I was doing, all of those above things that I just mentioned, that those activities actually had an impact on my daily life. But, as I've said before, I think is that the actual practices like those or those positive activities, it's like building up positive muscle in your consciousness and your body. And in some ways, I don't think it had an influence directly on my self-love journey. It wasn't directly correlated, but I do think it helps with establishing that muscle, which I think one of the reasons why positive psychology is so cool is because it's weaved into other therapeutic practices. So whenever you get to that point where you are willing to accept that self-love, it's definitely a muscle that has already been toned. So there's my caveat. And again, this is stemming directly from my experience. So if you hear this and you're already completely frustrated that you feel like you're doing everything that people have told you to do, I completely get it. And I would take that as a real cue to look deeper into maybe what's missing within that practice. And if I had to guess, it would be something internal within inside you. And you may not be internally supported by those external activities. And that's why we try here to tackle that first. And as we've talked about before, it may look differently for you, but I think the first step is fundamentally the same. Back to positive psychology, there is empirical evidence. I won't dive into it here, but if you Google it, you can see that different studies support it. And I think, throughout the years, positivity has definitely been studied throughout research studies and things like that. But here's, again, what I think is so cool about this movement is that it is starting to become a real practice and a real tool in the toolkit to complete health. And if you're a regular listener, you can see why this is intriguing to me. It's crazy and it's somewhat validating to know that what we've been talking about here and what I've been doing personally is actually a psychological practice, and that is it's gaining importance in the field. In fact, I follow other thought leaders talking about codependency, and a lot of them talk about narcissism, blame on family of origin within their practices. And to me, that's just not my approach. It doesn't work for me. And the way that I think about it, blame only reinforces the pain body within you. And to be blunt, I think blame is a cop-out. I think our strength as recovering codependents is recognizing those causal factors for sure, but not dwelling in them and focusing all of our other energies on ourselves, our self-worth, our self-love, self-affirmation. And that's what I really like about positive psychology. I think it's a great addition to the toolbox, like I said, of conquering those personal mountains. So if this interests you, I invite you to do the research on your own. If you're in therapy or contemplating therapy, to open up the conversation with your therapist, as I really think that adding this element, this is part of a complete treatment of any type of ailments that you feel like you suffer, that you've been diagnosed with. And I think this is part of blooming into the real, true, and self-love that you deserve. And thank you for joining me today, Magnificent Souls. As always, the Epiphany Vault is open for your feedback and thoughts. And we'll see you next time. Living and loving.